Having launched 7 major raids since the start of March, Harris orders a brief operational stand-down on March 13th. But this brief stand-down becomes an enforced 9-day break on operations as thick, persistent cloud descends upon England. Despite attempting to organize several major operations during this period, persistent fog over bomber bases forces Harris to cancel them all. The sudden halt in RAF bombing raids against Germany, which had averaged 1 attack every 2 to 3 days in February and March, creates an atmosphere of suspense and fear among the German population. As the Nazi government takes stock of the damage so far, rumors swirl throughout Germany about what the pause in RAF bombing raids mean.
The most important question that will be asked is that of the air war and total war. After all, the air war plays a decisive role in the general public discussion. The last air raid on Essen caused very serious damage at the Krupp plants, which will lead to a fairly large loss of production. With the rampant air raids on German cities, we are more and more short of craftsmen and also materials to make makeshift repairs to the damage. We are already forced to withdraw workmen's companies that were sent to Duisburg, for example, to Essen or Munich. They can only do the most necessary things and then have to be sent straight back to even more serious damage. In any case, the air war is beginning to give us serious cause for concern. In the West, a certain hopelessness is already spreading. Many here believe that the Reich government has already written off the West. Above all, the mood of the population is depressed by the question of what should happen next. Whether one should simply accept the air war without being able to do anything about it. In domestic politics, the air war is still of decisive importance. Although there have been no British air raids in the last few nights, the damage caused so far has been so great that we have our hands full trying to cope with it. Especially in Essen, the devastation is very great. The Heroes' Memorial Day will now take place next Sunday. I am having air raid precautions taken immediately, especially to ensure that under no circumstances will the Fuhrer be forced to interrupt his speech for the amusement of the English. It is interesting to note, by the way, that there have been no significant air raids in the past 4 nights. One puzzles over the causes. On the one hand, it is emphasized that the British do not like to attack in moonlight, since they are then too exposed to our night fighters. On the other hand, it is believed that they are preparing an invasion. And thirdly, it is feared that they are preparing a particularly heavy blow for Heroes' Memorial Day. The damage done at Krupp seems to be enormous after all. Speer intends to fly to Essen in the course of the afternoon to get a picture of the extent. On the other hand, however, we can state to our satisfaction that the industrial damage is not as difficult as the civil damage. Göring cannot understand why the British are not attacking the Ruhr without interruption, for here we are moving in parts through bottlenecks that harbor extraordinary dangers. Everywhere the question is being raised why the British did not make air raids on Reich territory during the last few nights. Whether the British intend to make a massive attack on Berlin on Heroes' Memorial Day? Who knows? With regard to the Heroes' Memorial Day, the Führer is determined to hold his speech even if the British should attempt an air attack. Whether they come or not about that, the Führer thinks we want to not worry about it. There's nothing we can do about it. In any case, all preparations, as far as they could be made at all, have been made. Florian has inspected the damage in Essen and described it as extraordinarily extensive. The British have done absolute precision work here, and even if the news that Krupp has been destroyed up to 80% is wildly exaggerated, we must prepare to accept very serious losses here. For Berlin, I am making total air raid protection preparations for Heroes' Memorial Day. Among other things, an absolute ban on leave for the Wehrmacht will be implemented for Berlin itself and for Potsdam. The fire departments from the surrounding towns have been put on alert. The whole family is still sitting up waiting for the English air raid. But Thank God it did not come. The English will probably not attack Berlin for psychological reasons, but partly the weather situation is also very bad. In England, there is ground fog, so that the planes cannot take off and cannot land. Perhaps the English have a surprise up their sleeve for us tomorrow evening, but this too must be accepted. The war brings new advantages every day, but also new disadvantages every day. We must face them with equanimity and a sovereign attitude. No English planes appear, as we had expected. It seems like the English do not feel like disturbing the Heroes' Memorial Day after all, as they would probably do poorly in world public opinion by doing so. The Fuhrer is glad that the air war cannot have too strong an effect at the moment, but he is under no illusions. He knows that as soon as the weather improves, it will flare up again.
In comparison to the apprehension and fear within Germany, the 9-day operational pause is taken advantage of by the wary crews of Bomber Command. John Searby, now promoted to wing commander following Guy Gibson's departure, settles into his new role as commanding officer of 106 Squadron. Months earlier, Searby had joined 106 Squadron to take over B Flight when its commanding officer was killed on operations.
When I took over B Flight in 106 Squadron, the influence of the previous occupants stayed with me for quite a while. In fact, I began to doubt whether I would ever get rid of him. So firmly had he stamped his personality on B Flight. The blue woolen scarf left hanging in the steel clothing locker, and the doodles of the ancient blotting pad remained. I never knew him, but an ambience hung over the battered teak desk for many weeks.
Guy Gibson had run 106 Squadron for exactly 365 days before he departed, leaving Searby to wonder if he could ever make the squadron his own. With his new duties as squadron commander, and the fact he was 3/4 of the way through his bombing tour, Searby also looked forward to a slowdown in operations as he assumed a more managerial role. In fact, Searby would not fly any more operations this month. For Ron Reed and his crew, the 9-day lull was used for different purposes. On his second free night from operations, Reed and his crew treated their maintenance ground crew to a night at the Alice Hawthorne pub, a show of gratitude for the backbreaking work these men carried out to keep their Halifax bomber flight-worthy. Reed also received word that his girlfriend had been called up for the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, a relationship ender as she would be transferred far away for training. In a world where 81% of Halifax bomber crews could expect to be shot down on operations, the only viable relationships were those available now. While celebrating in a pub with his ground crew that night, Reed stumbles into Joan, the landlord's daughter, and
a little pixie of a girl, with a winsome smile and a good line in repartee.
It would be the start of a rapidly flourishing relationship that would burn out just as quickly as it started. Though Searby and Reed would be spared operations during this period of inactivity, supplementary operations continued and Bomber Command crews continued to die. 4 of the 9 nights during this period saw mine-laying operations, costing the command 3 bombers and their crews, who disappeared forever into the cold waters of the North Sea or Atlantic. Finally, on March 22nd, Harris got his first clear night in over a week. But for Germany, it would be another night of quiet, for the target in Bomber Command's crosshairs tonight was not in Germany, but France. With Allied shipping losses to the U-boat on the rise once again, Bomber Command was still bound by the war cabinet to assist the Admiralty. As a result, Harris would turn his attention back to St. Nazaire, home to the German 6th and 7th U-boat flotillas. For the first time, a French town would feel the effects of the RAF's new radio bombing aids. And for the first time, the oboe beams from England turned southwest to guide the oboe Mosquitoes and main force bombers to their new target.